Have you ever loved someone so deeply that you forgot yourself in the process? You gave, forgave, showed up and stayed, even when your soul whispered that you deserved more. And they thought you'd keep coming back. They thought the chase was endless, that your love was a guarantee. Here's the thing no one tells you, but you're about to feel it in your bones. They were never in love with you. They were in love with being chased. This is a trap many of us fall into. It's one of the biggest misconceptions in modern relationships. The belief that love means proving your worth through endless effort, that giving more will make someone finally see you. But what if the real transformation doesn't come from holding on, but from letting go? Here's the truth that hits differently. The moment you stop chasing is the moment everything shifts. Suddenly, silence becomes your power. Peace becomes your loudest message. And in that stillness, they're the ones who start running from the consequences, from your absence, and most of all, from themselves. We're diving deep today, not into fluff or revenge, but into clarity, truth, and real Stoic relationships. This isn't about playing games, it's about breaking cycles. So if you've ever felt like you gave too much, waited too long, or loved someone who mistook your heart for a convenience, stay with me. You're about to uncover why your withdrawal was the most powerful thing you ever did. You'll see why they're not reaching out from love, but from ego. And most importantly, you'll realize your peace is not a loss, it's a level up. We're going beyond surface healing. We're tapping into the core of Stoicism, emotional freedom and self-reclamation. The kind of shift that doesn't just change your relationship, it changes your life. Because at the end of this journey, you won't just understand why they're running. You'll know exactly why you're not chasing. And when we get to the final part, trust me, you won't want to miss it. Ready to see the truth for what it really is? 1. They thought you'd break without them. They thought your silence would be your downfall. They believed that their absence would echo so loudly in your life that you'd be crawling back, desperate for scraps of attention, begging to feel seen again. They underestimated something crucial: your capacity to suffer and still stand. Because the truth is, when they left, yes, it hurt. The silence was deafening at first. Your body remembered their touch, your mind replayed the conversations, and your heart kept trying to make sense of the void. You asked yourself countless questions. Was I not enough? Did I do too much? Should I have waited longer? But as the hours turned into days and the days stretched into lonely nights, something unexpected began to take shape. You began to hear a different voice, not theirs, but yours. The one you had silenced to keep the peace, the one that had always known your worth even when you forgot. They thought you'd be paralyzed by loss, but instead you started moving, not away from something, but toward yourself. That's what they never saw coming. You see, people who feed on the energy of others rarely imagine their supply becoming self-sufficient. They thought your emotional world revolved around them, not realizing it was merely orbiting temporarily while you forgot your own gravity. And when they left, they assumed they'd return to find you broken. What they never considered was that you wouldn't be there at all. This isn't the kind of growth you post about in quotes or selfies. This is the kind of transformation that happens in silence, under pressure, in the darkest rooms of the soul. The place where real stoicism is forged. It's the moment you stopped searching for closure and started creating purpose. It's the shift from external validation to internal sovereignty. What they mistook for weakness, your loyalty, your patience, your softness, was the foundation of something unshakable. They assumed you needed them to survive, to feel whole, to feel seen. But your healing proved them wrong. Because here's the truth they're now forced to sit with. You didn't need them. You chose them. And there's a world of difference between what we need and what we choose. Needing is about lack. Choosing is about power. And now that you've reclaimed your power, they can feel it slipping through the cracks they helped create. They sense it in your stillness. They see it in your eyes if you ever cross paths. They hear it in the silence where your validation used to live. And no matter how much they try to fill that void with distractions, ego, or imitation, nothing replaces the energy of someone who once gave you everything and then gave it to themselves. There's a concept in Stoicism known as post-traumatic growth, the idea that pain, rather than being a prison, can be the path to profound evolution. That's where you are now. You're not the same person who waited by the phone or reread their messages hoping for a different ending. You're not the same version of yourself who doubted their worth based on someone else's emotional inconsistency. You've moved past the longing, through the loneliness, into clarity. And that clarity, it doesn't chase, it doesn't beg, it doesn't wait, it simply is. It stands tall, it walks forward. It holds the door open for peace and locks it behind anything that once disturbed it. They thought your world would collapse without their presence. What they didn't realize is that your world was never dependent on theirs. It was just momentarily entangled, not because you were lost, but because you were learning. And now, the person they knew, the one who stayed too long, cried too much and asked too little, is gone. In their place stands someone rebuilt, realigned, and reborn. That's the kind of change that isn't announced. It's felt, it's sensed, and it's permanent. There's no coming back from that kind of internal shift. And ironically, the very silence they used to control you is now what they fear the most. Because it isn't just silence, it's detachment, peace, and power. It's you finally living in alignment with your truth. And that version of you? That version doesn't break. That version builds. That version doesn't chase. That version leads. And in Stoic relationships, that's the ultimate transformation. Not revenge, not replacement, but self-reclamation. They thought you'd break without them, but you didn't. You broke open and became everything they weren't ready for. 2, they realize they don't know the new you anymore. The hardest truth someone can face is realizing that the version of you they thought they knew no longer exists. They left thinking you'd stay the same, frozen in the identity they formed in their mind. The one who waited, who worried, who adjusted, who shrunk to fit their comfort. They assumed that time would change everything except you. But time, combined with silence and self-awareness, doesn't preserve a person. It transforms them. When they finally circle back, trying to reach out with a casual, "Hey," or a hollow birthday text, they expect to encounter familiarity. They expect softness, warmth, the same emotional accessibility that once made them feel powerful. But instead, they hit a wall they didn't know you were capable of building. And not a wall of coldness or bitterness. No, this is a boundary shaped by clarity, respect, and a quiet kind of power that doesn't seek approval. It simply exists. The person they're trying to reconnect with now responds differently, moves differently, speaks with intention, and listens without the need to be chosen. They find themselves confused, disoriented even, because you no longer speak the emotional language they once exploited. The games that used to work don't land anymore. The pauses, the vague texts, the half-efforts, they're met not with longing, but with indifference. Because you've changed, not in appearance, but in essence. And this change didn't happen out of spite. It happened because you finally saw the cost of contorting yourself to be loved. You understood the difference between being emotionally available and emotionally accessible to manipulation. The new you doesn't flinch when they disappear. You don't check your phone, you don't scan stories for signs, you don't spiral in their silence. That silence has become your sanctuary. Your nervous system is calmer now. Your mind clearer. You've experienced what psychologists call an identity shift, a radical internal transformation where your beliefs, values, and self-concept evolve. And when that happens, something beautiful follows. your patterns break. The reactive cycles end. The emotional roller coasters stop. You start responding from a place of strength, not lack. You operate not from fear of loss, but from peace with self. And that shift, it's irreversible. This is where Stoicism breathes into your life, not just as a philosophy, but as a lived experience. You no longer react to external events as you used to. You no longer chase what doesn't choose you. You've become unmoved by drama and grounded in self-worth. They realize this the hard way because they've clung to the memory of someone who's no longer here. They kept a snapshot in their mind of the you who once compromised endlessly, who bent until they broke. But that person was forged. In confusion and emotional exhaustion, the fire didn't destroy you, it refined you. And now you are precise, you are intentional, you are whole. And they don't know how to navigate that. They don't recognize the glow that isn't performative, the peace that isn't pretending, the silence that isn't punishment. It's protection. They can't understand how someone they once thought they had emotional power over has become so self-contained, so sovereign, so uninterested in validation. You're not ice, you're clarity. You're not closed, you're discerning. And what they're feeling now is not rejection. It's the absence of manipulation's success. You've stopped being available to anything that costs your peace, and that, to them, feels like losing control. But it's not about control. It's about freedom. This is the part they never thought they'd witness, where you no longer flinch, beg, or explain. You simply are. And your presence now speaks volumes without effort. They thought your transformation would be superficial. Few gym visits, a new look, a rebound relationship. But this isn't a surface-level glow-up. This is soul-deep. This is Stoic relationships in their purest form, where love doesn't mean attachment, and boundaries don't mean walls. They mean standards. They mean choosing peace over potential. When they try to mirror your growth, they fail, because your evolution came from pain, purpose, and patience. Theirs is reactive, yours is intentional. They try to replicate the aesthetics, but can't embody the energy. And it's driving them inward, forcing them to confront a version of you they don't understand and can't reach. Not because you're hiding, but because you've elevated. You've stepped into a space of self-respect that doesn't entertain anything less than mutual depth. And that scares them, not because they've lost love, but because they've lost access. You're no longer emotionally rentable. You don't audition for affection. You've become whole, and wholeness doesn't chase. So now they sit with the echo of their choices. They're haunted by the realization that the door is still there, but the person behind it is not. And this truth hurts more than rejection. It creates an existential dissonance. Because to re-enter your life would mean facing the reality that they're no longer relevant to the new you. And this version of you, it doesn't look back. It doesn't revisit what has already been understood. It doesn't relive stories that have ended. This version writes new chapters in new languages, with new characters. And unless someone speaks in the dialect of effort, consistency, and emotional responsibility, they simply can't participate. That's the cost of mishandling someone who was once all in. The privilege of being in your life was never about your availability. It was about your choice, and now that choice no longer includes them. If this resonates with you, if you've ever been the person they came back to, only to find they no longer fit your spirit, like this video and comment number 1 below. Your growth is valid, your clarity is powerful, and your transformation deserves to be seen. Don't forget to subscribe for more content on Stoic relationships, healing, and emotional mastery. We're not just surviving love, we're evolving through it. Let's keep rising. 3. They try to come back, but it doesn't feel the same. Eventually it happens, the moment they reach out, whether with a carefully worded, "Hey, how have you been?" or a late-night message that drips with nostalgia. Maybe they liked your recent post. Maybe they reacted to an old memory. Maybe they tried to act like they've been thinking about you for a while, as if time hasn't passed in the way that it has. But here's what's different now. What used to stir your heart now stirs something entirely else. Not butterflies, not hope, not longing. It stirs clarity, and clarity doesn't beg for attention. Clarity doesn't get swept away by recycled words. What they expected was for you to respond the way you used to, as if no growth had occurred, as if you hadn't gone through countless nights of silence, introspection, and slow healing. They expected eagerness. Instead, they met equanimity. What they don't realize is that their return doesn't mean what it once would have. Because for you, the weight of their absence has already been processed. You've replayed the memories, you've asked the questions, you've wrestled with the pain. You've come out the other side, not broken, but reborn. And their message isn't a spark of destiny, it's a reminder of how far you've come. This moment is not about whether you'll let them back in. It's about recognizing that the connection they're trying to revive no longer exists in the form they remember. They're not speaking to the same version of you. That version, the one who hung on every word, who read between every line, who offered unfiltered access to their heart, has evolved. What remains is someone who doesn't mistake contact for care, who doesn't confuse timing with transformation. Because in the space they vacated, you've filled it with self-worth. You've rebuilt your nervous system to no longer crave what was once chaotic. The very act of reaching out, while once something that might have made you drop everything, now feels neutral. And that neutrality? That's the victory. That's the result of choosing yourself enough times to no longer need their attention as proof of your value. This is where Stoicism again anchors your response, not through indifference, but through presence. You're grounded now, not because you stopped feeling, but because you stopped reacting. Their message is a test, not of your feelings, but of your transformation, and you've already passed. The urge to respond with old patterns may flicker, but it doesn't consume. You're no longer governed by impulse. You pause, you breathe, and you assess not whether they deserve a response, but whether it adds value to your peace. Because peace is your new standard, and unless someone arrives with substance, consistency, and accountability, their words feel empty, no matter how poetic they sound. They might say they miss you, that they've changed, that they finally realize what you meant to them. But you don't just listen anymore, you observe. You read energy, not just language. You examine patterns, not just promises. And if their actions echo the same inconsistencies of the past, you don't need closure, you already created it. The ironic twist is this. They're not reaching out because they've changed. They're reaching out because your energy has changed. You're no longer chasing. You're no longer waiting. And in that detachment, you've become magnetic. Not because you tried to be, but because you finally became whole. And wholeness, to someone who once thrived on your wounds, is disarming. They're not used to this version of you. The one who doesn't flinch at their return, who doesn't bend at their requests, who doesn't need their validation to feel complete. Their ego expected a welcome. Instead, they receive silence, stillness, or a response so measured it feels foreign. That's when they realize it's not just that you're different, it's that the power dynamic they once relied on has dissolved. What they're mourning isn't just the connection, it's the control, it's the role they played in your life. But the stage has changed, and the script has been rewritten. Now, you're the lead. You're the author. You're the one who decides what roles are cast and which ones are retired. And their character no longer fits in the narrative of your new life. This isn't bitterness, it's discernment. You can forgive and still move forward. You can acknowledge the bond without reopening the door, because love, when misused, becomes a mirror. And what they see now in your reflection is someone they can't manipulate, delay, or deceive. They see someone who listens to their intuition louder than any apology. They see someone who loves themselves more than the idea of potential. And that is where true power resides. Not in rejecting others to prove a point, but in accepting that some connections are meant to end, not to punish, but to preserve. You don't owe them access simply because they've returned. You don't owe them a chance simply because they finally see your value. The truth is, they saw it all along. They just didn't expect you to see it too. And now that you do, you're not willing to dim your light to make them feel comfortable in your presence. The invitation to your life has expired, not out of spite, but out of evolution. You've shifted from survival to sovereignty, from proving your worth to embodying it. And that kind of energy can't be faked, borrowed, or rushed. It's cultivated, it's earned. And unless they've done the inner work, not just posted about it, not just pretended to change, but truly faced themselves, they won't understand why they can't reconnect with you. Because you didn't just change your behavior, you changed your frequency. You vibrate at a level that repels inconsistency, that filters out manipulation, that silences the noise of unfinished business. You don't need dramatic goodbyes or tearful explanations. Your growth has already spoken, and what it says is simple. This version of you cannot be accessed with the same old key. Let them come back. Let them realize. Let them try. But you don't need to entertain it. Because the real closure was never in the message. It was in your becoming. And that right there is what they never anticipated. 4. They lose control the moment you stop explaining. There's a moment, subtle, quiet, almost unnoticeable to the outside world, when everything changes. It's not marked by a dramatic argument or a fiery confrontation. No, it's something much more powerful. It's the exact moment you stop explaining yourself, when you stop defending your intentions, when you stop pouring your heart into someone who only listens to respond, not to understand. That's the shift they never anticipated, because for so long they relied on your emotional transparency. They relied on the fact that every time they pulled away, you'd step forward with an explanation, a reassurance, a desperate attempt to reconnect and make sense of the disconnection. You became predictable in your compassion, reliable in your vulnerability, and they fed off of that. Each time they distanced themselves, you leaned in. Each time they sent a confusing message, you tried to decode it. Each time they invalidated your feelings, you explained harder, louder, deeper, until you were emotionally exhausted from justifying your worth to someone who had no intention of valuing it. But the moment you withdrew, not in bitterness, not in anger, but in calm refusal, that's when the game changed. That's when they felt it. The loss of control, the absence of the emotional dance they choreographed. You see, people who seek validation through control don't know how to function when they're met with silence. They depend on chaos to maintain their power. They thrive in confusion because it keeps you guessing, keeps you hoping, keeps you stuck. But Stoicism teaches us that the highest form of strength is self-control. The ability to remain unmoved by what we cannot change and unshaken by emotional bait. When you stop engaging in their drama, when you stop needing to be understood by someone committed to misunderstanding you, you break the cycle. And in that break, they lose their grip. Because their power was never real, it was borrowed. Borrowed from your insecurity, borrowed from your fear of being alone, borrowed from your hope that if you just explained one more time, they'd finally see you. But now, you've stopped seeking clarity from someone who benefits from your confusion. You've stopped asking questions you already know the answers to, and that terrifies them, not because they love you, but because they no longer know how to predict you. You've become a variable they can't manipulate. Your stillness disrupts their strategy. Your peace becomes their panic. Because when someone is used to pulling strings and you no longer respond, they're forced to sit with their own emptiness. And that's where the real unraveling begins. They'll start to question why you're so calm, why you're not reacting, why you seem unaffected. But what they don't understand is that you're not unaffected. You're aligned. You've chosen clarity over chaos. You've chosen inner stillness over external validation. And in doing so, you've reclaimed every part of yourself that was once scattered in attempts to be understood. Your refusal to explain isn't rudeness, it's protection. It's the sacred boundary that says, I no longer offer my energy where it's not reciprocated. It's what Stoic relationships are built upon: truth, intention, and mutual respect. Anything less is noise, and you've turned the volume all the way down. You've learned that real connection doesn't require convincing, that love isn't something you earn by diminishing yourself. And now, when they try to provoke a response with silence, distance, or mixed signals, you don't play along. You see the game, but you don't sit at the table. You observe, but you don't engage. You understand, but you don't explain. And it drives them mad, because the very emotional chaos they use to control you has become irrelevant in the presence of your emotional mastery. You're no longer addicted to the highs and lows. You no longer need closure, because your peace has closed the chapter for you. They thought they were pulling away to teach you a lesson, but they ended up giving you space to find yourself. And now, in your absence, they feel everything you once carried: the doubt, the confusion, the wondering. Except now, it's their turn. You've stopped being the one who reaches out first, who sends the long paragraphs, who needs to be seen. You've stopped being the one who apologizes for expressing human emotion. You've stopped breaking yourself into smaller pieces so someone else can feel whole. That's what they lost. Not the old you who begged for crumbs of attention, but the evolved you who no longer accepts a seat at a table where respect isn't served. And now they're left with the memory of someone who used to chase, while you move forward with the reality of someone who chooses peace. This is what happens when you reclaim your narrative. You become untouchable, not because you've built walls, but because you've built standards. Your silence is no longer a weapon, it's a boundary. Your calm is no longer passivity, it's power. And as they scramble to re-establish the dynamic that once gave them leverage, they realize that you've outgrown the entire equation. This is the paradox of emotional control. The more they try to regain it, the more your disinterest reveals their lack of it. And now, all that's left for them is the realization that you no longer seek to be understood by those who never listened, no longer fight to be seen by those who were blind by choice. They lost control, not because you changed, but because you remembered who you were before you handed them the script. If this part of your journey resonates, if you felt the shift that comes with reclaiming your peace, like this video and comment number 1 to let others know they're not alone. And for more content grounded in Stoicism, emotional strength, and healthy Stoic relationships, don't forget to subscribe. This isn't just about healing, it's about transformation. And you, my friend, are right in the middle of it. 5. They start copying your growth but can't keep up. After the silence, after your withdrawal, after the shift they never saw coming, what happens next is as fascinating as it is predictable. They begin to mimic you. The very same person who once dismissed your healing journey, who rolled their eyes at your late-night journaling, who mocked your self-help books and minimized your emotional awareness, now starts echoing your steps like a shadow trying to keep up with light. At first, it might almost catch you off guard. They start posting inspirational quotes about peace, love, and growth. They begin mentioning therapy, spirituality, even Stoicism. They take gym selfies with captions about mental clarity. They speak as if they've suddenly awakened to the truths you tried to share with them long ago. But something feels off. Because, while their words sound familiar, the energy is hollow. There's no depth behind their gestures, no inner alignment supporting their supposed transformation. You can feel it, not because you're bitter, but because you've done the work. Real work. The kind of work that no one claps for. The kind of growth that comes from sitting alone in your pain, from confronting your patterns, from breaking generational cycles in silence. You didn't post your growth, you lived it. You didn't rehearse healing, you experienced it day by day, breath by breath. And now, while they try to replicate the surface of your glow, they can't imitate the roots. Because your transformation didn't happen for attention, it happened for survival. It came from necessity, not vanity. You had to rebuild. They're just reacting. And this is where Stoic relationships teach us something vital. Growth isn't aesthetic, it's energetic. It's how your presence no longer chases, how your eyes don't seek approval, how your energy walks into a room and doesn't need to announce its evolution. That can't be copied. That's why they're struggling. They thought by mimicking your steps, they'd get access to the version of you they lost. But what they don't realize is that the path you took wasn't a trend. It was a spiritual reckoning. You cried in rooms they never entered. You chose peace over drama when chaos was calling your name. You restructured your nervous system, not for applause, but for peace. And now they're scrambling. Not to become better people, but to compete. With your new standard, they're not afraid of your healing. They're afraid your healing will attract someone who truly values it. Someone who recognizes your emotional intelligence as strength, not sensitivity. Someone who doesn't take your calm for granted or test your silence for weakness. So they try to beat that timeline. They mirror your habits, talk your language, try to wear your energy like a costume. But energy doesn't lie. And even when they do all the right things, something still feels off, because their growth is about regaining control, not releasing ego. They haven't changed for themselves. They're trying to change to win you back, to re-enter your life on a frequency they haven't actually earned. But that's not how healing works. You can't pretend your way into alignment. You can't fake the frequency of peace. You can quote Stoicism all you want, but if your nervous system is still addicted to drama, your energy betrays you. They post, they perform, they reach, they mimic, but they're still the same at their core. And you feel it, not because you're looking for faults, but because you've become fluent in self-awareness. You know the difference between real change and reactive behavior. You know the difference between someone growing and someone gaslighting you into thinking they've changed. So you don't bite, you don't respond, you don't try to correct or confront, because you've learned that true power doesn't argue with performance, it simply exits the stage. This is what emotional maturity looks like. It's not that you don't care, it's that you no longer invest in what doesn't grow with you. You're not angry, they're just no longer relevant to your journey. And that irrelevance, that's what stings the most for them, because they used to be the center of your attention. Now they can't even hold your interest. Not because you're cold, but because you're focused. Focused on your path, focused on your peace, focused on building something real, something lasting, something aligned. And that's not something they can copy. They can't shortcut your depth. They can't mimic your resilience. They can't Photoshop your journey. You earned every inch of your glow, and even if they post the same quotes, hit the same workouts, talk the same language, they'll always be a few steps behind. Because their transformation isn't rooted in truth, it's rooted in fear. And fear can only fuel you so far before the mask slips. That's when they'll feel it, the exhaustion of pretending, the hollowness of performative healing. And when that moment comes, they'll look at you, not with entitlement, but with realization that the door they took for granted now requires a version of themselves they've never built. That's the beauty of real transformation. It changes your entire ecosystem. It's not about becoming someone new. It's about becoming who you were before the world convinced you to be small. And now you've reclaimed that. You've stepped into your essence. You've aligned your spirit with your standards. And In that alignment, you've created a life they can't follow you into, not because you're gatekeeping, but because they haven't done the work to walk beside you. Let them try, let them post, let them mirror, but you keep walking. Because your path is real, and real can't be replicated. 6. They're haunted by the same silence they once used against you. There was a time when silence was their weapon, when they would go quiet just long enough for your insecurities to start speaking louder than your peace, when they'd leave your messages unread, ignore your calls, vanish without explanation, not because they didn't have the time, but because they knew how deeply you needed closure. They knew how much you craved clarity, and they withheld it because they could. That silence used to eat at you. It made you overthink everything, every word you said, every moment you shared. You replayed conversations, reread messages, tried to decode what went wrong, all while they sat comfortably in the control seat, watching you spiral. But what they didn't count on was that silence, when left long enough, doesn't just create confusion, it creates distance, it gives birth to detachment. Because at some point, even the kindest soul grows tired of fighting battles in their own mind that someone else caused and refuses to clarify. So you changed, you stopped waiting, you stopped wondering, you stopped needing them to speak in order for you to find peace. You turned that silence into space, space for healing, space for reflection, space to realign your life with your truth. And now, the silence they once used against you has become the very thing that haunts them, because they're starting to realize something terrifying. You're no longer on the other end waiting. You're no longer refreshing your inbox or checking if they watched your story. You're not decoding their absence anymore. You've understood its message loud and clear. They thought silence gave them power. What it actually gave was permission for you to walk away, grow up, and move on. And now they're the ones scrolling through your posts with a pit in their stomach. They're the ones replaying your last words. They're the ones wondering if you still care. And the irony, you don't hate them. You're not even mad. You've just evolved past the point of needing their noise to feel whole. That evolution is what they can't handle. Because you didn't turn cold, you became clear. You didn't become bitter, you became boundaried. And that clarity, that boundary, that unwavering stillness, it echoes in their mind now louder than any words you ever said. They can't escape it, not because you're doing anything to remind them, but because your absence is finally speaking in a language they understand. It's a language of consequences, a language of emotional accountability, and they don't know how to translate it because they never expected to have to. In Stoicism, there's a concept that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. You've learned that lesson well. You suffered in their silence because you hadn't yet learned to choose yourself. Now you have, and in doing so you've cut the cord they never thought would break. That's why they're haunted, not by ghosts of what was, but by the living reality of what they lost. You've become someone they don't recognize, someone they can't read, someone they can't reach. And that, more than any blocked number or unanswered text, is what's truly driving them crazy. They remember how accessible you once were, how you'd break your own boundaries just to keep the connection alive. How you'd forgive without apology, love without reciprocation, show up when they made no effort to meet you halfway. And now, all of that is gone. Not in a dramatic exit, not in a scorched earth goodbye, but in silence. A silence that doesn't seek revenge, doesn't throw shade, doesn't need validation. A silence that simply exists because peace has become more important than closure. That's what Stoic relationships are built upon. Not just the presence of love, but the absence of chaos. They're built on the foundation that love should never be confusing, and connection should never require emotional acrobatics. They're realizing now that the silence they once used to keep you in check is the same silence that closed the door behind you. They can't manipulate what no longer engages. They can't push buttons that have been rewired. They can't reach someone who no longer sees them as a source of anything valuable. And what haunts them the most isn't that they can't talk to you, it's that you're not even trying to talk to them. It's that you're genuinely, completely, peacefully gone. That kind of energy can't be faked. That kind of silence can't be ignored. It sits with them in quiet moments, lingers at the end of their days, whispers in their minds when they remember who you were and who you've become. And the truth is, they're not mourning the relationship, they're mourning their control. They're mourning the version of you who would have answered at midnight, who would have sent the long message, who would have tried one more time. That version no longer exists, and no matter how many times they try to test the waters, to bait a response, to stir your energy, you remain unmoved, because you've finally embodied one of the core tenets of Stoicism. You have power over your mind, not outside events, and with that power you've chosen to let go, to release, to heal. They thought silence would destroy you. Instead, it rebuilt you. And now it's their turn to sit in it. Not because you're trying to hurt them, but because you've realized some people only understand boundaries when they're enforced with quiet conviction. So let them wonder, let them overthink, let them feel the weight of the absence they created. Your job isn't to explain anymore. Your job is to evolve, and you've done it beautifully. If this chapter spoke to your soul, if you've ever felt the quiet satisfaction of peace replacing pain, like this video and comment number 1 to affirm your growth. And make sure to subscribe for more content that honors your emotional journey and supports your path toward true healing, grounded in the wisdom of Stoicism and the power of authentic Stoic relationships. We're not chasing, we're rising, and your silence is the loudest proof of that. They thought you would always be there, that your loyalty was permanent, that your heart was unshakable no matter how many times they tested its limits. But what they never counted on, what they never even considered, was that love does not mean submission, that loyalty does not mean self-neglect, that a kind heart can still choose to walk away. And walk away you did, not to hurt them, not to prove a point, but to save yourself, to finally say no to what no longer served your spirit, to reclaim the parts of you that had been scattered across apologies, never received, and efforts never appreciated. You did something many never do. You turned pain into purpose. You didn't retaliate. You refined. You didn't become cold. You became clear. And now, the version of you that once chased, explained, begged, and waited has been replaced by someone grounded, peaceful, and whole. Someone who doesn't need closure to be free. Someone who doesn't need a response to feel worthy. This is not just healing, it's becoming. And in this becoming, you've proven something powerful. You don't have to chase anyone to find love. You only need to stop running from yourself. That is what Stoicism has always taught us, that we cannot control others, but we can master ourselves. And in that mastery, we find everything we were seeking outside: clarity, direction, strength. You gave them chances, access, love, and now you've given yourself something greater: freedom. And the beauty of this freedom is that it speaks without words. It doesn't scream for attention. It simply lives, boldly, quietly, authentically. So let them run. Let them remember. Let them face the silence they once used to unnerve you. You are not bitter. You are not broken. You are not waiting. You are walking, not away from them, but toward everything that finally aligns with who you truly are. Let this be your quiet revolution. Let this be your peace. And never forget, you were never too much. They were just not enough. And now your life reflects that truth in every step you take forward. Keep going. The path is yours now.